Thomas sat in a steel cage, his frail body pressed against the cold bars as if he could disappear into them. His fur had thinned to uneven patches, and his cloudy eyes blinked slowly at the steady stream of families walking by. Children squealed with delight at the kittens batting toys across their cages, while parents leaned down to point out the younger, playful cats. But no one stopped at Thomas's cage. Not one hand reached for him. He was 26 years old, ancient by cat standards. To the shelter staff, the number alone felt like a sentence. "Poor boy," one worker whispered, her voice breaking. "No one adopts cats this old?" The words hung heavy in the room, like a truth everyone already knew. Around Thomas, life went on. Cats played, kittens climbed, visitors laughed. But he was a shadow among them, trembling quietly in his corner, invisible to the world. The staff knew how these stories usually ended. Senior cats rarely left alive, and yet none of them could bring themselves to give up on him completely. Late one evening, as the shelter quieted, a worker lingered by his cage, fingers brushing the bars. "You deserve so much more than this," she whispered. Thomas leaned faintly into her touch, his purr so soft it was barely more than a sigh. And then, the twist. The next morning, with heavy hearts and little hope, the staff made a decision. They snapped a picture of Thomas, his bony frame curled on a thin blanket, his eyes dulled with age, and posted it online with a simple caption. 26 years old, still waiting for a home. They didn't believe anyone would answer, but they had to try. The photo went live early in the morning, a grainy snapshot of Thomas curled into himself, his bony frame pressed against a blue blanket, stared back from the shelter's page. The caption was short, almost pleading. 26 years old, still waiting for a home. At first, the notifications rolled in, hearts, sad emojis, sympathetic comments. Poor thing. Bless his heart. He deserves peace. But sympathy wasn't adoption. Hours passed, and not a single person offered to take him. The staff checked the post at lunch, then again before closing. Each time, their shoulders sank lower. The silence in the adoption office grew heavier. "People feel sorry," one worker muttered, staring at the screen. "But no one actually wants him." Another whispered what no one wanted to say aloud. "Maybe this really is the end for him." The air was thick with dread. They had seen senior cats fade away before, waiting for families that never came. And Thomas, frail, trembling, 26, looked destined to become another sad statistic. But that night, somewhere miles away, one woman's thumb froze mid-scroll. Her name was Laura Cassidy. She wasn't searching for another cat. She already had a house full of rescues and had promised herself she couldn't take in more. But when she saw the photo, she blinked, her breath catching. 26? She whispered aloud, as if saying it might make it less shocking. At first she thought it had to be a typo. Surely they meant 16. But no, 26 years, older than some of her co-workers' children. She stared at the picture again, a gaunt face, cloudy eyes, a fragile body barely clinging to comfort. Something inside her twisted painfully. Her thumb hovered over the screen. Logic screamed at her to move on. A cat that old wouldn't live long. Adopting him would mean heartache, medical bills, nights of worry. She set the phone down, shook her head, and tried to push the thought away. But when she closed her eyes that night, all she could see was Thomas, waiting, watching, while families walked past his cage. The twist was already set in motion. Laura couldn't stop thinking about him. That night, Laura tossed in bed, her phone still glowing faintly on the nightstand. She had scrolled past dozens of posts before, cats and dogs needing homes, and she always told herself, someone else will step up. Someone else can do it. But Thomas's face wouldn't leave her mind. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him, frail, pressed against the bars of his cage, staring at a door that never opened. His age, that impossible number, echoed in her head. 26. It felt less like a statistic and more like a countdown. What if no one else takes him, she thought. What if tomorrow comes and he's still there? Waiting? She tried to reason with herself. A cat that old meant heartbreak. He could pass away within weeks, maybe even days. She wasn't ready for that. She already had too many animals, too many responsibilities. Someone better suited would surely come along. But as the hours dragged by, sleep refused to come. At one point, she whispered into the dark as though answering a voice only she could hear. What kind of ending is that after 26 years of life? By dawn, Laura was still awake, staring at the ceiling. And with the morning light came a terrible clarity. No miracle had happened overnight. No one else had taken him. He was still waiting. Her hand shook as she picked up her phone and pulled up the shelter's post once more. His photo looked even sadder in the daylight, his cloudy eyes pleading silently through the screen. Laura's breath caught. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling. Then, before she could second-guess herself again, she typed the words that would change everything. "Stop looking. I'll take him." She stared at the comment for a moment, heart pounding, before pressing send. At the shelter, staff phones pinged with the notification. A few workers gathered around the screen, blinking in disbelief. "Is she serious?" one whispered. They had seen hopeful comments before, people making promises they couldn't keep. They knew how easily compassion could fade when reality set in. But this felt different. Could Laura really be the miracle Thomas had been waiting for? Or would her words vanish like all the others, leaving Thomas to wait alone once again? The next morning, Laura drove to the shelter with her heart in her throat. The closer she got, the more doubts gnawed at her. What if she wasn't strong enough? What if everyone was right, that it was reckless to take in a cat this old? When she stepped inside, the staff recognized her instantly. Their eyes flicked between each other, cautious, almost guarded. They had seen people make promises online before, only to back out when faced with the truth. A worker led her toward the back, voice low, almost apologetic. "We just want you to be prepared," she said carefully. "Thomas, he's not like the others. He's frail, he has hypothyroidism, severe dental disease. He mostly sleeps, and at 26. Her voice faltered. "He may only have weeks left." Laura's stomach tightened. She already knew he was old, but hearing the words out loud made it real, frightening. Another staff member joined in, her tone heavy. Sometimes keeping them here is kinder. At least we can manage their pain until the end. We don't want you to get hurt." The words hit Laura like a blow. She felt her resolve waver. Was she about to bring him home just to watch him fade away in front of her? Would she be sparing him pain or setting herself up for heartbreak she wasn't prepared to endure? Her eyes fell on the cage. Thomas lay curled on his blanket, blinking up at her as though he'd been waiting. His cloudy eyes softened, and for a moment she swore he recognized her. Laura crouched low, pressing her hand against the bars. His frail body shifted, just barely, leaning into her touch. It was the faintest gesture of trust, but it was enough. Her throat tightened. She turned back to the staff, her voice trembling but steady. "I know what you're saying. I know it won't be easy, but I can't leave him here. He deserves to live his final days in a home, not in a cage." The room fell silent. One worker nodded slowly, sliding the paperwork across the desk. Laura picked up the pen, her fingers trembling as she signed her name. Each stroke felt like a vow carved into stone. As she set the pen down, a heavy realization settled over her. She wasn't just adopting a cat. She was embracing heartbreak, choosing to carry the weight of his final chapter. And as the carrier door clicked shut with Thomas inside, one question haunted her mind. Had she just saved him, or taken on a goodbye she wasn't ready for? Laura didn't drive home right away. Instead, she headed straight to the veterinary clinic, the carrier on the passenger seat beside her. Thomas barely stirred, his cloudy eyes opening and closing with the rhythm of the car's hum. At the clinic, the vet lifted him gently from the carrier and placed him on the cold exam table. Thomas didn't fight, didn't hiss, didn't claw. He simply sat there, trembling as though too tired to resist. The vet, an older man with kind eyes, leaned close and began his examination. He pressed lightly along Thomas's frail body, checked his heartbeat, and then opened his mouth. Laura winced. What she saw made her stomach twist. Rotted teeth, some worn to jagged stubs, the gums raw and inflamed. The vet sighed heavily. Severe dental disease. He's been living with this for years. He glanced at Laura, his face etched with concern. I'm surprised he can even eat. Laura's chest tightened. Can you fix it? The vet hesitated. Maybe we could extract what's left, but surgery at his age? He trailed off, shaking his head. The anesthesia alone could kill him. Honestly, it might be kinder to leave things as they are. Sometimes compassion means knowing when not to push. Laura felt the words like a stone in her chest. She had promised Thomas a home, but was she only prolonging his suffering? Was she selfish for not letting him go in peace? The vet continued the exam, noting his hypothyroidism, his fragile bones, the years of hidden pain carried in silence. When he finally stepped back, his expression was grave. He doesn't have long, he said softly. Make the time he has left comfortable. Laura swallowed hard, her heart aching as she looked down at Thomas curled on the table. Was this what she had signed up for? Days, maybe weeks of decline? But then something unexpected happened. The vet placed a small bowl of soft food in front of him, testing whether he'd eat. Laura braced for rejection, certain his ruined mouth would make chewing impossible. Instead, Thomas leaned forward. Slowly at first, then with startling determination, he began to eat. Bite after bite, his tiny jaws worked, and within minutes, the bowl was clean. He lifted his head, licking his lips, his cloudy eyes shining faintly with satisfaction. The vet blinked in disbelief. Well, he muttered, almost smiling, that's not what I expected. Laura laughed through her tears, stroking the side of Thomas's face. You're full of surprises, old man. And in that moment, the doubt shifted. Just a little. Maybe he wasn't ready to give up yet. Maybe, just maybe, Thomas still had some fight left in him. News of Laura's decision spread quickly through her circle of friends and family. At first, people assumed she had taken in another foster, maybe a kitten or a young cat in need. But when she explained, the reactions were immediate and harsh. Laura, what are you thinking? One friend asked bluntly over the phone. He's 26. That's like adopting a 90-year-old human. You're setting yourself up for heartbreak. Another shook her head, disbelief dripping from her voice. You can't save every animal, Laura. Why put yourself through this? You could have adopted one with years ahead of it instead of weeks. At a family dinner, her sister put down her fork, frustration flashing in her eyes. What if he only lasts a week? Wouldn't that feel like failure? You're going to destroy yourself. Laura listened quietly, her hands tightening in her lap. She could hear the concern buried under the criticism, but the words still cut deep. For a moment, she almost faltered, the weight of their logic pressing in on her. Then she took a slow breath, and her voice, though soft, carried steady resolve. Maybe he won't live long, she admitted. Maybe I'll lose him sooner than I want. But then, at least that week will be filled with warmth and love, not a cage. That's not failure." The table fell silent. No one could argue with the truth in her words. But later, when she was alone in her bedroom, Laura lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The doubts came rushing back in the quiet. Was she being selfish? Was she sparing Thomas or prolonging his suffering? Her friends' voices echoed in her mind, reckless, foolish, doomed to end in heartbreak. Laura turned on her side, glancing at the small form curled on a blanket beside her bed. Thomas's breathing was slow, steady, his frail body rising and falling in rhythm. She reached out and stroked his fur gently, whispering to herself as much as to him, "I just want you to know you were loved." But in the silence that followed, the question still haunted her. Had she done the right thing, or was she bracing for a goodbye she wasn't ready to face? Laura braced herself for decline. Every morning she woke expecting Thomas to be weaker, quieter, closer to slipping away. She tiptoed around her home, afraid she'd find him still, his tiny chest no longer rising. But Thomas had other plans. One morning, Laura padded into the living room to find the blanket by the window empty. Panic shot through her. Had he wandered off? Had something happened? She followed the faint sound of claws on the hardwood, her heart racing. There he was, slowly padding across the hall, his frail paws pressing firmly against the floor. His cloudy eyes scanned the room as though mapping every inch of his new kingdom. He moved carefully, deliberately, but with a quiet determination Laura hadn't seen before. She held her breath, watching as he shuffled past the couch and into the kitchen, where he sat by her feet, lifting his head as if to say, "I belong here." That afternoon, another surprise. Laura dangled a feather toy absent-mindedly, expecting nothing. For weeks, Thomas had seemed too frail to bother, but suddenly a thin paw rose from the blanket and swatted, clumsy but purposeful. The sound of the feather brushing against his claws made Laura laugh out loud, tears springing to her eyes. "Look at you," she whispered, covering her mouth in awe. "You're not giving up, are you?" The so-called dying cat wasn't fading. He was thriving. Each day, he grew bolder. He followed Laura from room to room, his steps slow but steady. When she sat at her desk, he curled at her feet. When she settled on the couch, he climbed carefully into her lap, pressing close as though he had been hers forever. The staff had warned her to expect decline, but what she saw was transformation. Thomas wasn't waiting for the end anymore. He was living, claiming his place, savoring warmth, rediscovering joy. And with every step, every purr, every playful swipe, he stunned everyone who had doubted him. Thomas wasn't just surviving, he was proving them all wrong. It started quietly. Just a few friends who had doubted Laura's choice now asking to come by and see Thomas for themselves. They expected to find a cat on his last legs, frail and fading. Instead, they found him curled in a sunbeam, blinking serenely at them, his paw tucked under his chest like royalty. When Laura bent to stroke his head, he leaned in with surprising strength, purring faintly as though declaring, "I am still here." Word spread quickly. Neighbors stopped by with treats and toys, shaking their heads in disbelief. 26 years old? He looks like a miracle? Children who had heard his story through their parents arrived with handmade drawings, Thomas crowned with golden crowns and titled King Cat. Laura taped the pictures to her fridge, her heart swelling every time she passed them. Soon, strangers who had seen his story online began reaching out. Donations arrived for food, medicine, even soft blankets embroidered with his name. Messages poured in. "You've inspired me to adopt an older cat." Thomas is teaching us all something. Even the shelter staff, who had whispered in despair that no one would ever take him, were stunned. They posted an update of Thomas settled in his new home, and the comments exploded. One staff member summed it up in a single line. "We thought he would fade away here. Instead, Thomas has become a symbol of hope." The cat, who once trembled unseen in a cold cage, had now touched thousands, his story proving that no life is ever too old to matter. Weeks passed, and Thomas settled into his new life with a calm grace that surprised even Laura. His days were simple: sunlit naps on the living room rug, soft meals devoured with quiet determination, the faint rumble of a purr each time Laura's hand brushed over his fur. At first, Laura thought she had saved him, but the longer she watched, the clearer it became. Thomas was the one changing her, and everyone who heard his story. Friends who once warned her against heartbreak now admitted they were wrong. "He doesn't look like a burden," one whispered after stroking his frail head. "He looks grateful." Neighbors who had only ever wanted kittens began asking the shelter about senior cats. Donations poured in for older animals. Parents told their children, "See, even old pets deserve love." Laura often found herself staring at him in quiet awe. This cat, once invisible, forgotten, dismissed as too old to matter, had become a teacher. His story wasn't about pity, it was about dignity, about proving that love isn't measured in years left, but in the life you fill those years with. One evening, as Thomas curled beside her, his faint purr vibrating like a soft heartbeat, Laura whispered, "Saving you wasn't just about you, old man. You've reminded all of us, old lives matter as much as young ones." Thomas blinked slowly in that way cats do, a gesture of trust and recognition. In that moment, Laura realized his final chapter wasn't about endings at all. It was about rewriting what people believed was possible. Thomas, once overlooked and unwanted, had become a symbol of hope, not just for animals, but for anyone who had ever been told they were too old, too fragile, or too late. And that was the miracle no one had expected.